Do you still remember the sharp humor and deep humanity of MASH? The series once made America laugh and cry alongside its frontline doctors. But behind that golden age, time has struck the cast brutally. Faces changed by Parkinson's, bodies worn down by cancer, and quiet deaths that left fans stunned. Let's look back at their stories and honor the legacy they left behind. Loretta Swit as Margaret Hot Lips. Houlihan. Loretta Swit was born on November 4, 1937, in Passaic, New Jersey. At 35 years old, she played Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan in MASH, 1972 to 1983, a strict, proud head nurse whose transformation became one of the show's most memorable journeys. Over 239 episodes, she turned a stereotype into a fully human portrait of strength and vulnerability. But behind the camera, Swit's personal life was filled with romantic turbulence. Her long relationship with composer Charles Gross collapsed under the pressure of fame and conflicting ambitions, leaving her emotionally shaken. Years later, she married actor Dennis Houlihan in 1983, only to endure another painful separation when their marriage ended in 1995. These breakups hardened her sense of independence, but also left her grappling with loneliness at the height of her career. Meanwhile, the industry's insistence on calling her Hot Lips made her feel trapped. As the decades passed, age introduced new challenges. Swit gradually developed severe joint problems that made movement difficult, slowing her once vigorous stage career and confining her to quieter work such as painting and animal rights advocacy. Sadly, Loretta Swit died on May 30, 2025, in her New York City home at the age of 87, passing away peacefully from natural causes. Her estimated net worth of $10 million came from decades of acting and art, much of which she donated to causes she cherished. Alda as Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce. Alda was born on January 28, 1936 in New York City. At 36 years old, he played Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce in MASH, 1972 to 1983, becoming the series' central voice through all 256 episodes. His quick wit and emotional depth turned the battlefield surgeon into one of television's most enduring characters. Yet while his career soared, the strain of constant filming pushed intense pressure onto his marriage with Arlene Weiss, whom he wed in 1957. He spent months at a time away from home, juggling acting, writing, and directing, leaving Arlene to raise their 3 daughters largely on her own. The imbalance created years of tension, and Alda often admitted that success came at the cost of peace inside the family. Even after MASH, films like The Four Seasons kept him on the road, deepening the emotional distance before the couple slowly rebuilt stability. That hard-won balance was shattered again when Alda began facing physical decline. In 2015, he learned he had Parkinson's disease as he struggled with stiffness. The illness forced him to reduce his workload sharply, and every public appearance afterward required deliberate effort. Still, he chose transparency over retreat, using his platform to help others while managing the slow progression of the disease. Today, Alda is 89 years old and continues to work selectively through podcasts and writing, supported closely by Arlene after nearly 7 decades together. His estimated net worth of $50 million reflects a lifetime of films, books, and scientific outreach. Jaime Farr as Maxwell Q. Klinger. Jaime Farr was born on July 1, 1934, in Toledo, Ohio. At 38 years old, he played Maxwell Q. Klinger in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the desperate corporal who wore women's clothing in hopes of securing a Section 8 discharge, later becoming company clerk across 217 episodes. His character became one of the most beloved icons of the entire series. Behind the humor, Farr's life was burdened by pressures he rarely spoke about. His marriage to Joy Ann Richards, whom he wed in 1963, endured long stretches of financial instability, most painfully in the 1980s when a failed real estate investment left them on the brink of bankruptcy. Joy stayed, but the weight of raising their children while he fought to rebuild his career created years of tension and fear about the future. As his career moved forward, new challenges emerged. Years of physical comedy and long shooting schedules led to worsening joint pain, later diagnosed as severe rheumatoid arthritis in the early 1990s. The condition made movement stiff and painful, forcing him to reduce acting roles and shift toward voice work and radio. Still, he kept pushing through, appearing in films like The Cannonball Run and Scrooged, determined not to be defined by illness or past struggles. Today, Jaime Farr is 91 years old, still active enough to host a travel radio program and make occasional television appearances. His estimated net worth of $6 million comes from decades of acting, memoir writing, and steady work beyond MASH. Mike Farrell, as B.J. Honeycutt. Mike Farrell was born on February 6, 1939, in St. Paul, Minnesota. At 36 years old, he played B.J. Honeycutt in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the warm, level-headed surgeon who replaced Trapper. His quiet humor and emotional steadiness became essential to the show's final seasons. Away from the set, his personal life was far more turbulent. His first marriage to Judy Farrell lasted from 1963 to 1983, surviving 2 decades of shifting ambitions and constant disagreements about parenting and career choices. The strain deepened when MASH pulled him into writing and directing, leaving him drained and often absent, while Judy tried to manage their children alone. When the marriage finally collapsed, it left him emotionally bruised just as his career reached its peak. His second marriage to Shelley Fabares in 1984 brought stability, but even that bond bent under pressure as Farrell committed himself to political activism and anti-war campaigns that frequently kept him far from home. Those pressures built into physical exhaustion. Long days directing episodes and juggling activist work consumed him, pushing his body into chronic fatigue as he tried to balance the weight of public responsibility with the hope of maintaining a peaceful home life. Even as roles in series like Providence revived his screen presence, he admitted that the emotional toll of his private life had reshaped how he approached acting and family. Now, Mike Farrell is 86 years old and remains active in humanitarian and human rights work, often speaking publicly on prison reform and refugee protection. His estimated net worth of $10 million reflects decades of acting, producing, and advocacy, built through years. William Christopher, as Father John Patrick. Francis Mulcahy. William Christopher was born on October 20, 1932, in Evanston, Illinois. At 40 years old, he played Father John Mulcahy in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the gentle, compassionate priest who evolved from background character to a central emotional anchor. His quiet warmth became one of the show's defining comforts, but his personal life carried far heavier burdens. His marriage to Barbara Smoker, beginning in 1956, survived for 6 decades. Yet it endured a painful separation in 1975, when long filming hours and constant financial anxiety pushed their relationship to the breaking point. They reconciled, but the struggle left scars, especially as Christopher found himself typecast after MASH. Hollywood repeatedly offered him only priest roles, leaving him frustrated, underpaid, and increasingly depressed as meaningful work slipped away. These emotional battles were soon followed by physical ones. Years of cigarette use quietly carved a path toward the illness that would claim him. In mid-2016, he was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, and the decline was swift. By the end of the year, he could no longer work, no longer sing, and no longer stand without support. Finally, William Christopher died on December 31, 2016, at his home in Pasadena, California, at 84 years old. He was laid to rest quietly, surrounded by his family, leaving behind an estimated net worth of $2 million, earned through television work, and years on Days of Our Lives. Harry Morgan as Sherman T. Potter. Harry Morgan was born on December 10, 1915, in Detroit, Michigan. At 59 years old, he played Colonel Sherman T. Potter in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the firm but deeply compassionate commander who guided the 4077 THA through its final years over 168 episodes. His steady presence brought emotional grounding to the show's later seasons. But Morgan's life carried shadows long before he put on the uniform of Colonel Potter. His 45-year marriage to Eileen DeChon was a source of devotion and sorrow. While they raised 4 sons together, his early career failures and long periods of unemployment pushed him into depression and alcohol abuse. Eileen stayed beside him until her death in 1985, a loss that devastated him after a lifetime of partnership. He remarried the following year to Barbara Bushman, but the new marriage was troubled, from his 1996 arrest after a violent argument to years of emotional instability that neither of them could fully overcome. As the years passed, age brought further decline. Long-buried exhaustion resurfaced, and by his 90s, Morgan's body had grown frail. Repeated bouts of illness weakened him until pneumonia struck in late 2011. He spent his final days at home in Los Angeles, drifting in and out of sleep as the illness slowly overtook him on December 7, 2011, at 96 years old. His remains were cremated and returned to his family, marking the quiet end of a man whose strength had carried generations of viewers. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was $10 million, earned through nearly 7 decades in film and television, and sealed by the legacy of a character who made him unforgettable. David Ogden Stiers as Charles Emerson Winchester III. David Ogden Stiers was born on October 31, 1942, in Peoria, Illinois. At 35 years old, he played Charles Emerson Winchester III in MASH, 1977 to 1983, the proud, brilliant surgeon whose arrogance gradually softened. His classical voice and dignified presence transformed Winchester into one of the series' most complex characters. Behind that elegance, however, Stiers carried a silent ache. For decades, he hid his sexuality, terrified that Hollywood would blacklist a gay actor working in family programming. The secrecy corroded his confidence, isolating him professionally and emotionally. Without a partner to share the burden, loneliness became a constant companion. As his health faltered, the isolation deepened. In 2017, he was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and the disease advanced quickly, robbing him of strength and the ability to continue voice work, the craft that had sustained him through films like Beauty and the Beast and series such as Star Trek: The Next Generation. Sadly, David Ogden Stiers died on March 3, 2018, in Newport, Oregon, at 75 years old, from complications of bladder cancer. His estimated net worth of $8 million was left partly to local arts organizations, reflecting a life marked by solitude, brilliance, and generosity in the face of personal pain. Gary Burghoff, as Walter Radar O'Reilly. Gary Burghoff was born on May 24, 1943, in Bristol, Connecticut. At 29 years old, he played Walter Radar O'Reilly in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the shy, quick-thinking company clerk who appeared in 174 episodes before leaving in Season 8. His innocence and instinctive warmth made Radar one of the show's most unforgettable characters. Behind the softness of Radar was a man quietly fighting despair. Burghoff was born with Poland syndrome, leaving several fingers on his left hand severely shortened. Fame intensified it. Constant close-ups and public attention made him feel exposed and imperfect. His first marriage to Angela Brown ended in 1979, after years of resentment over career demands and the emotional distance created by his rising fame. His second marriage to Elizabeth Bostrom began in 1985, but slowly unraveled under the same pressures: arguments over priorities, long separations, and the challenge of raising 3 sons while he battled self-doubt and depression. By the late 1970s, the strain became unbearable. The laughter on set felt forced, the fan expectations suffocating, and the loneliness overwhelming. Burned out, Burghoff walked away from MASH in 1979, returning only for a farewell episode before disappearing from mainstream television. The years that followed brought scattered guest roles, game show appearances, and modest projects. Now, Gary Burghoff is 82 years old and fully retired, living quietly and focusing on painting and wildlife work. His estimated net worth of $1.5 million reflects a life shaped not by luxury, but by talent, insecurity, and the heavy price of early fame. Kelly Nakahara, as Nurse Kelly. Yamato. Kelly Nakahara was born on December 16, 1947, in Honolulu, Hawaii. At 25 years old, she played Nurse Kelly Yamato in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the warm and determined Asian-American nurse whose quiet dignity stood out in a series filled with louder personalities. Her presence may have seemed gentle, but behind her calm smile was a lifetime of battles few knew she fought. On set, she confronted subtle racism that chipped at her confidence, scripts that pushed stereotypes, jokes written at her expense, and moments where she had to decide whether to stay silent or risk her career by speaking up. She chose to push back, gently but firmly, even when it left her emotionally drained. At home, she clung to the steady love of her husband, David Wallet, whom she married in 1968. Their life together was tender and deeply rooted, but when he died years before her, the grief hollowed out a part of her that never fully returned. She continued raising their children with strength, yet every milestone carried the quiet ache of someone missing from the room. As the years passed, her health became a heavier burden. Nakahara had struggled with asthma since childhood, each episode a reminder of her vulnerability. When pneumonia linked to COVID-19 struck in early 2020, it hit her failing lungs with devastating force. She fought, as she always had, with quiet resilience, but there are battles the body simply cannot win. Sadly, Kelly Nakahara died on February 16, 2020, at 72 years old in Pasadena, California. She was cremated, and her ashes were returned to her family. Her estimated net worth of $10 million came largely from her art. Jeff Maxwell as Igor Straminski. Jeff Maxwell was born on November 11, 1937, in New York. At 35 years old, he played Igor Straminski in MASH, 1972 to 1983. The clumsy, overworked mess hall cook whose nervous charm became a subtle but essential part of the show's humor. Beneath his comedic timing was a performer who spent years trying to be seen as more than the jokes written for him. Off-camera, Maxwell struggled with the consequences of being typecast. Hollywood repeatedly pushed him toward the same bumbling comedic roles, and each rejection for more serious work left him questioning his worth. His private life was no less complicated. After his first marriage collapsed under the weight of secrecy and self-denial, Maxwell came out as bisexual in 2010, a truth he had carried in silence for decades. The revelation caused painful fractures within his family as relatives argued, withdrew, or tried to erase the subject entirely. Those wounds were deepened by the exhaustion. Maxwell drifted between guest spots, voice work, and corporate projects, always working, always pushing, but rarely receiving the recognition he deserved. Even as he found success with projects like Young Frankenstein and Kentucky Fried Movie, he struggled privately with the fear that he would never escape the shadow of Igor. It took him years to accept that he could still build a meaningful life outside Hollywood's narrow expectations. Today, Jeff Maxwell is 88 years old and remains active through his popular MASH Matters podcast, where he finally speaks openly and confidently about the show that shaped him. His estimated net worth of $1 million reflects a career built not on fame, but on resilience. Larry Linville as Frank Burns. Larry Linville was born on September 29, 1939, in Baker, Oregon. At 33 years old, he played Major Frank Burns in MASH, 1972 to 1977, the insecure, self-righteous surgeon whose bitterness and jealousy fueled much of the show's early conflict. Linville's private world, however, was far darker than anything written for Frank Burns. The show's comedic cruelty fell directly onto his shoulders. Audiences loved to hate Frank, but that hatred often bled into Linville's real life. Casting directors labeled him difficult or one-note, and roles dried up quickly. The frustration seeped into his marriages. His first two unions collapsed under the strain of his unstable career, and his third also ended in heartbreak after years of financial stress, job insecurity, and emotional exhaustion. Each divorce cut deeper, leaving him increasingly isolated, even as he continued to pretend everything was fine. Then illness arrived, and everything changed again. In 1998, doctors discovered a malignant tumor beneath his sternum, a revelation that shattered whatever remained of his confidence. Surgery removed part of his lung, but the complications were brutal: persistent pain, recurring infections, and the fear of a body slowly failing him. As cancer advanced, he grew thinner, weaker, and increasingly aware that fame had given him everything except the comfort of growing old without fear. Sadly, Larry Linville died on April 10, 2000, in New York City at the age of 60, after complications from pancreatic cancer surgery. His ashes were scattered at sea off the coast of Bodega Bay. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $4 million, the fragile sum of a career that gave joy to millions. Wayne Rogers as Trapper. John McIntyre. Wayne Rogers was born on April 7, 1933, in Birmingham, Alabama. At 39 years old, he played Trapper John McIntyre in MASH, 1972 to 1975, the impulsive, charismatic surgeon whose energy defined the early seasons. His sudden departure shocked audiences, but the truth behind it was far more painful than fans ever realized. Rogers' private life was marked by turbulence long before he put on the uniform of Trapper John. His first marriage, beginning in 1960, crumbled under a decade of growing emotional distance and rumors of infidelity. The split left deep resentment on both sides. His second marriage, which lasted nearly 30 years, also fractured under the weight of constant work, financial pursuits, and complex affairs he later regretted. Even after remarrying again, the emotional fallout lingered, creating years of quiet tension around the family. Leaving MASH threw him into legal disputes that drained his energy and deepened his bitterness. Although he eventually rebuilt his career through financial investing and television commentary, the wounds never fully healed. His later years brought more clarity, but also a quieter loneliness, as friendships faded and old battles resurfaced in memory. Sadly, Wayne Rogers died on December 31, 2015, in Los Angeles at the age of 82 from complications of pneumonia. He left behind an estimated net worth of $100 million, earned not from Hollywood, but from years of strategic investments that finally gave him the security that acting never had. Johnny Haymer as Sergeant Zelmo Zale. Johnny Haymer was born on July 18, 1920, in Cleveland, Ohio. At 52 years old, he played Sergeant Zelmo Zale in MASH, 1972 to 1983, the sharp-witted supply sergeant known for scheming his way through the chaos of the 4077th. But the humor on screen hid a far more fragile story off camera. Haymer's career was a long battle against invisibility. Though he married Helen Sylvia Graff in 1949 and remained with her until his death, their marriage was often strained by financial uncertainty. Acting jobs came sporadically, and raising two children under the constant threat of unemployment placed immense pressure on their home. Haymer felt trapped between providing for his family and accepting roles far below his abilities. Even when he found recognition through character work and voice acting, especially in Transformers, he feared it was never enough to create long-term stability. As the years progressed, the burden on his body matched the burden on his mind. Heavy smoking and years of studio work weakened his lungs, and when cancer struck, it progressed quickly. He continued working between treatments, but each job left him more exhausted, more aware that he was running out of time. Finally, Johnny Haymer died on November 18, 1989, in Los Angeles at 69 years old from cancer. He was buried at Mount Sinai Memorial Park. His estimated net worth of about $1 million represented decades of hard-earned but often overlooked work. McLean Stevenson as Henry Blake. McLean Stevenson was born on November 14, 1927, in Normal, Illinois. At 45 years old, he played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake in Say, 1972 to 1975, the gentle, well-meaning commander whose warmth made him one of the show's most beloved figures. Yet behind that comforting presence was a man slowly unraveling in private. His personal life was marked by heartbreak. Stevenson married 3 times, first to Eleanor McGinley in the 1950s, then to Louise Herbert in the early 1970s, and finally to Ginny Fleischman in the 1980s. All 3 marriages collapsed under the strain of his restless ambition and the insecurity he carried throughout his career. The divorces left him profoundly lonely. He had no children, a silence in his life he rarely acknowledged but deeply felt. This emotional turmoil intertwined with his professional struggles. Believing he could become a leading star, he left MASH, a decision he later called his greatest mistake. Each failed series that followed chipped away at his confidence, turning his quest for success into a painful spiral of regret. The stress only worsened his fragile health. Stevenson carried a family history of cardiac disease, and years of disappointment, loneliness, and pressure accelerated his decline. By the 1990s, after decades of emotional strain and a late diagnosis of bladder cancer, his body began to fail. Sadly, McLean Stevenson died on February 15, 1996, in Los Angeles at the age of 68 after a sudden heart attack. He was cremated and laid to rest at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. His estimated net worth at the time, around $4 million, reflected a long career overshadowed by the heartbreak of choices he wished he could take back. G.W. Bailey as Sergeant Luther Rizzo. G.W. Bailey was born on August 27, 1944, in San Antonio, Texas. At 35 years old, he stepped into MASH in 1979 as Sergeant Luther Rizzo, the lazy, sharp-tongued supply man whose southern drawl became a late series highlight. His gruff, comedic presence fit perfectly into the 4077th, yet the man behind the character carried wounds much heavier than the jokes he delivered. Bailey entered the show still recovering from the strain of his first marriage. He had married Eleanor June Gooseby in 1966, and together they had 2 children, Terry Lynn and Martin Randolph. But the constant financial instability of an actor trying to break into Hollywood strained their home life for decades. Roles were small, paychecks came unpredictably, and by the 1990s the emotional wear had dissolved the marriage. Their 1999 divorce marked the end of a long, painful chapter filled with arguments about time, money, and the challenges of raising children while their father lived between auditions. His second marriage, beginning in 2000, was steadier but still shaped by the scars left from those earlier years of struggle. Despite family turmoil, Bailey pushed forward professionally, though the stress never fully left him. Being typecast as a grumpy older man brought opportunities, but it also trapped him in roles that paid the bills while limiting his range. He hid the exhaustion well, finding comfort in charity work after his goddaughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Now Bailey is 81 years old. He continues to act occasionally, splitting his time between performing and supporting the Sunshine Kids Foundation, where he once served as executive director. His estimated net worth of $4 million reflects a lifetime of persistence. Time has taken so much from the cast of MASH, but their legacy still lives in every scene they left behind. Which actor's story shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories behind the legends.